Standing in the middle of our $18 million luxury estate, the crystal chandeliers felt colder than usual. We were hosting 50 elite guests for Thanksgiving dinner when my mother-in-law, Eleanor, threw a grease-stained apron at my chest. "You're not staff, Chloe," she sneered, her voice loud enough to make the nearest guest turn away in awkward silence. "But you are free help. Get to the kitchen!" I've spent a decade managing unruly classrooms, so I didn't raise my voice. I simply smiled, signed the papers she shoved at me, and whistled for my rescue dog. Eleanor thought she'd finally won. She had no idea. She just signed her own eviction notice. I've been waiting exactly 3 years for this moment. Are you listening to this while doing chores, driving, or relaxing in bed? What time is it where you are right now? Let me know your storytime routine below. I stood in the center of the kitchen, looking down at the apron Eleanor had just tossed at me with the casual disdain one might use for a stray dog. The house felt colder than the marble floors I had professionally polished just last Tuesday. The house felt heavy, much like the 5 years I'd spent trying to fit into a family that saw me as nothing more than a transaction. When I married Marcus, I wasn't just a bride. I was the silent engine keeping their $18 million mansion running. They loved the prestige of our elite gated community, but they despised the person who quietly maintained the family seat. Every month, like clockwork, I'd write an $8,400 check for maintenance, which was really just a polite term for fueling Eleanor's addiction to a lifestyle she couldn't afford. My lesson plans paid for their marble floors. My late nights grading papers funded their wine cellar. I was their ATM child. To them, my career wasn't a point of pride. It was a utility bill they expected me to pay for the privilege of carrying their last name. I spent years in a state of suppressed vulnerability, but the more I gave, the more I became a burden in their eyes. The kitchen was filled with a sense of a Michelin star-level feast. I had spent 3 grueling days preparing after Eleanor fired the entire catering staff just to teach me a lesson in humility. Outside the swinging doors, I could hear the tinkling of wine glasses. I knew that if I walked out there, I would be invisible. I was the one cropped out of family photos because Eleanor said I didn't photograph well with their aesthetic. My chest felt heavy with a dull ache. I felt like an imposter in my own home, a stranger in a house built on my own sweat. Marcus would occasionally squeeze my hand in private, but in front of his mother, he was a different man, cold, dismissive, and silent. I was the scapegoat they blamed for their stress, yet I was the only thing standing between them and the foreclosure. Notice they were too arrogant to see coming. The silence of the kitchen was shattered by the high-pitched squeal of tires on the gravel driveway outside. I peered through the window to see my sister-in-law, Tiffany, stepping out of a brand new Porsche Cayenne. It was a luxury SUV that cost more than my annual salary, and I knew exactly whose bank account had been bled dry to pay for that aesthetic. As an educator, I knew exactly what Tiffany was, a student who had never been told no. Eleanor glided into the room, her eyes scanning me with clinical coldness. "Chloe," she said, her voice dropping into that fake, sweet register. "Tiffany is getting married, and she needs a home that reflects her status. We've decided you're going to sign over your New York penthouse to her as a wedding gift. She deserves an aesthetic that is higher than yours." The audacity of the request should have made me scream. For years, I had been bound by an invisible chain. You might wonder why I stayed so long. The truth is, when you grow up being told you're a burden, you start to believe that paying for affection is the only way to be loved. It wasn't patience that kept me there, it was a prison without bars. I didn't stay because I was weak. I stayed because I didn't know the door was already unlocked. Eleanor tapped her Cartier love bracelet against the counter, waiting for my compliance. She expected me to play the role of the scapegoat who gives until there's nothing left. But as I looked at her, the numbness began to crack. For the first time, I wasn't seeing a powerful matriarch. I was seeing a hollow woman who mistook my silence for submission. The spark of fury in my chest didn't explode. It froze into a sharp, jagged piece of ice. That night, I sat in my darkened office and looked at the alert on my phone. A withdrawal of $250,000 from my private trust fund. My heart didn't race. It went cold. I knew the signature on the transfer. It was Marcus's. He had abused his position as a joint trustee, thinking I'd never bother to audit the accounts. I walked into the living room where Marcus and Eleanor were sipping expensive wine. I didn't cry, I simply held up the phone. "Marcus, why is there $250,000 missing from my inheritance?" The silence in the room was brittle. Eleanor spoke first, her voice dripping with condescension. "Tiffany had some delicate obligations at the country club," she said, waving a hand dismissively as if $250,000 in gambling debts were just a minor inconvenience. "We needed it more than you did." Marcus finally looked up, his face a mask of narcissistic entitlement. "Chloe, don't be so dramatic," he said. "Think of it as a utility bill for your life here. You get to be a part of this family. That privilege isn't free." A utility bill. That's what I was to them. Not a wife, not a partner, but a source of power to fuel their engine. In that moment, I became an awakened victim. As a teacher, you learn when a student is beyond a simple lecture. Silence was my final grade for them. I didn't mention that I had already spent the last 3 years quietly buying up the deed to this very state as they bled themselves dry. "I see," I said, my voice clinical and precise. I even managed a small, tight smile. I didn't tell them I was done being their ATM child. I just turned and walked away to call my attorney. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived with a biting chill at 6 a.m. I was already outside, clearing the frost and fallen leaves from the patio to ensure the outdoor heaters were ready for the guests. The water reflected the gray sky, as cold as the family inside. Eleanor stepped out onto the patio, draped in a designer Burberry coat. She was holding a complex Starbucks order. She didn't offer me a coffee. She didn't even say good morning. "The pool looks cloudy, Chloe," she said, her voice sharp. "And don't forget, the Michelin star level feast needs to be ready by 5. We're heading to the spa with Tiffany." Try not to be such a disappointment for once. As their oversized status symbol pulled out, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I used to wait for a thank you. But as I scrubbed the countertops, I realized something terrifying. To them, my sacrifice wasn't a gift, it was a utility bill. They had normalized my pain so completely that asking me to suffer for my sister wasn't cruelty in their eyes. I went into my office and locked the door. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer. "Is everything ready?" I asked. My voice didn't tremble. "The audit is complete," he replied. "The unauthorized withdrawal of $250,000 is a clear breach. Combined with the morality clause in your prenup, you have the legal grounds to trigger a full takeover." "Good," I said, looking out at this fortress of greed that was about to disappear from under their feet. "Make sure the notice to vacate is ready for tonight's dessert." The dinner was served. 50 high society guests sat around the mahogany table. Eleanor stood up, tapping her wine glass with a Cartier love bracelet. The room went quiet. "I have a brief announcement," she said. "Tonight, we are making some changes to protect the legacy of this $18 million estate. Chloe has decided to step away from her role here. She signed the renunciation papers." She looked at me, expecting a plea for mercy. I didn't give her one. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Actually, Eleanor," I said, my voice clinical and devoid of emotion, "I think there's been a significant misunderstanding." Right then, the heavy oak doors opened. My attorney, Mr. Sterling, walked in. He wasn't dressed for dinner. He was carrying a leather briefcase. The room froze. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus hissed. "This," Mr. Sterling said, placing a thick document on the table, "is an emergency trust audit." He looked at Marcus with professional disdain. "It appears $250,000 was removed from my client's trust fund without authorization. That is a fiduciary breach." Eleanor scoffed. "It was family money?" "Except it wasn't family money," I interrupted, my voice cutting through her excuses. "And according to the morality clause in our prenup, any theft of my private funds triggers an immediate transfer of all marital assets to me." I let the words hang in the air. Eleanor's face went ghostly white. She dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the marble floor. "What are you saying?" Marcus stammered, his hands shaking. "I'm saying I quietly purchased the mortgage and debt to this $18 million mansion 3 years ago," I said, standing up slowly. "I was the owner all along. You were just my guests. But guests who steal don't get to stay for dessert." Mr. Sterling handed them each a document. "This is a formal notice to vacate. The police are waiting at the gate regarding the theft. Leave now or leave in handcuffs." You have exactly 1 hour to pack your bags and leave. Watching Eleanor and Marcus drag their designer suitcases across the driveway was the most silent moment of my life. I severed all ties that very night. I blocked their numbers, changed the locks on the palatial estate, and drove 3 hours north to my lake house with nothing but my dog and a sense of profound peace. Looking out over the water, I finally understood the difference between having and being. My in-laws had the mansion, but they were absolutely nothing without my funding. Their power was never theirs. It was just a costume they had rented with my money. The moment I stopped paying the rent, the costume vanished, and the world finally saw them for what they truly were: empty. True justice isn't about destruction, it's about legacy. I used the recovered $250,000 to establish a foundation that protects vulnerable spouses from financial abuse. I wanted to give them a way out. As for Eleanor and Marcus, I heard they moved into a shabby rental on the edge of town. Every month, when the bill comes due, I hope they remember the utility bill they tried to make me pay with my soul. I'm no longer the woman standing in the back of the photo. I am the one holding the camera. And for the first time in my life, the view is beautiful. But my story is just one of many. Now, I want to turn the floor over to you. If you have ever been treated like a mobile ATM instead of a human being, leave a yes in the comments. We want to hear your story so we can heal together. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next time we take back justice. See you in the next one.